Sup y'all, it's me, it's your boy Citrasloth, and I think I can be a reputable source because I'm bolding too. We're in this together, Asmongold. So, how do we fix WoW? We can learn a lot from what people are saying about Classic right now. Many of these suggestions boil down to just a few points. Make the game harder, give players more choice, make the decisions those players make more impactful, and remove unnecessary game mechanics. I'm going to go through each of these points and see what Blizzard can reasonably do in order to correct their mistakes with retail WoW. There's so many ways that the game could be improved simply by making more aspects of it challenging. A challenging and equally rewarding leveling experience created engaging gameplay way before endgame in vanilla. Zone level scaling was a great idea, but it really hurt player choice by not allowing players to choose whether or not face much more difficult area for greater rewards, like going into a zone that you're not really up to level for earlier and getting better gear and stuff. The return of many rare and harder mobs in the scaled leveling zones that we have currently, I think would allow the player to go out of their way for a more substantial challenge if they wanted to. For leveling, a few things could be done to make the experience more engaging. Number one is reducing the raw strength of heirloom gear, but keeping the experience buff. That would make the decision to use heirloom gear over certain other gear that you get while leveling more impactful, instead of the heirloom piece basically being the best in slot for everything under level cap. Reducing the quality of gear received from most quests and dungeons pre-level 30 would also, I think, help, because players should be excited when they get a green or a blue item, not be completely decked out in them by level 25 from spam running dungeons. Blues and greens should be a relative rarity, I think, when leveling, unless very difficult tasks are completed, like doing a dungeon. And that would make players excited every time they manage to get a new piece of gear while leveling, especially while questing. Having all of the caster classes, except for healers, never have to worry about mana as one of their major resources while leveling, I think is really dumb. It's one of the stupider things that Blizzard implemented while they were like fixing the game or whatever for low level stuff. So if mana management for casters was reintroduced at least a little bit, like you can't spam cast for 10 minutes straight without running out of mana, at least somewhat, it would cause those players to think more about the spells they used and how often they engaged in combat. I think it would also incentivize some consumable use, which I'll touch on later. I think Nixium touched on this in his video about how to fix BFA a little bit, but if there were more factions with reputations that were relevant not just at endgame, it would give players an incentive to explore and give them another simultaneous goal to accomplish while leveling. Also, I think if Blizzard brought back the ability to lose reputations with factions, that would be really great. It's a really overlooked mechanic that used to be commonplace in early WoW, but for some reason just no longer exists. Having these simple mechanics like being able to lose rep for killing guards make the game feel more immersive. It actually gives real meaningful consequences for people who choose to attack like neutral quest hubs like they do in BFA with War Mode on. I think if dungeons were harder but more rewarding while leveling, I think that would also help a lot. Going into a dungeon should feel impactful, and it should be as equally as rewarding. The current gear inside dungeons, like the level, is fine, but they're way too easy for the gear that you get. Forcing players to learn their class's cloud control abilities and mechanics like pack pulling strategies makes literally every player better in the long run, and it also makes for a much more challenging and engaging experience, especially if all you do for leveling is stand in Orgrimmar or Stormwind and press join queue over and over again like a lot of us do. This becomes even more engaging if there were more quests that implemented dungeon delving. There seems to be almost one quest at the end of every leveling zone that requires you to venture into a dungeon, but there are a few zones that are missing this feature. Off the top of my head, I can name Stone Talon Mountains, Stragglethorn Vale, and Arathi Highlands. If Blizzard were to add like a scenario or a new dungeon at the end of these questing zones to wrap up the story, I feel like that would go a long way to making Azeroth feel more alive. As for making some components at endgame more difficult, most of it boils down to replicating the more rewarding gameplay of leveling while simultaneously fixing the gear curve. If you don't know what a gear curve is, here's a quick explanation. In the current game, the black line represents your power level over time. Once you hit level cap, there is a huge increase of the power at the beginning, but that quickly tapers off and gets extremely hard to see any meaningful growth in power with the more you play. A corrected curve would be a more gradual power level increase as you play, as shown by the blue line here. But with still small and meaningful increases of power available late in the gearing process. So how do we bring this curve more in line? One way to bring the curve more in line is to increase the gap between item level increases and Mythic Plus. A plus 10 is no longer the same difficulty as a Mythic Raid, and it shouldn't reward the same level gear as a mythic raid. Either make the plus 10s harder or reduce the gear to match the level of difficulty. Currently, I think a plus 15 or higher would be able to match the difficulty of a mythic raid, but as you know, people still get gear just for completing the dungeon, even if it isn't in time. If an in-time dungeon run would reward 3 pieces, I believe a good idea for incentivizing players to complete them in time if after the timer ends, a new countdown starts. And after that countdown ends, the number of pieces in the instance drops to 1. This makes it much more difficult for bad players getting carried to acquire rewards, which partially fixes the gear curve, but not entirely. World quests are an amazing mechanic. I love the idea of them, but Blizzard needs to find a way to make world quests more rewarding without giving away epic gear. Removing Titan forging should help this fact, but adding in crafting profession stuff or more collectibles I think would make world quests feel more rewarding without ruining the gear curve. And another thing Blizzard can do is make dungeons at a higher level more rewarding. Heroic dungeons should still be relevant to starting your endgame gearing process, and currently, if you're lucky, you might never have to actually enter a heroic dungeon in order to start your gearing process once you hit level cap, because there's so many other ways that are faster to get even better gear. When people talk about giving more players choice and making decisions more impactful, they often point to vanilla leveling. Leveling back then made many of your decisions feel like they had meaning. Talents used to be more permanent, and now you have to change them on the fly. Your talents dictated what type of spec you were, and it was expensive and slightly time consuming to go back and change them. More talents in general while leveling would help alleviate this fact, and having some sort of meaningful power progression every few levels is important. I also feel like bringing back spell ranks and trainers would go a long way to making players make decisions about what spells and abilities you decide to get at certain levels. This would also heavily impact how you play the game and also give incentive to collect gold to pay for your spell upgrades. The ability to create hybrid builds and experiment was also part of what made the old talent tree system loved. It's impossible to reach into 2 talent trees now, but if Blizzard implemented a system something along the lines of where you get bonuses from another spec, sort of like how the current Druid affinity talent works, it would give the classes better identity and allow the players to experiment and play with different focuses. Class quests and expansive exploration-based quests are part of what made classic questing great. Blizzard captured a bit of that magic in Legion with class order hall campaigns, and if they applied that mindset consistently in the future, it would make each class feel more alive and distinct. Having flavor quests like the Warlock Green Fire for other classes would also create some diversity within each class, allowing for more player expression, which would make those decisions to do those quest lines more impactful. Bringing back server firsts, I think, would also be a good idea, as they were a flavorful way to have communities compete with one another for very specific goals. It did cause some toxic behavior, but I'm sure Blizzard could find a way to mitigate that while also re-implementing this feature, which gave you a special achievement for doing something so well so quickly. If reforging made an appearance, I believe it would also be an overall boon to the game. The main issues that plagued reforging when it was removed no longer exist for the most part, like hit cap. You don't have to redo all of your gear in order to prioritize for hit cap anymore. If it was brought back, every piece of gear received would add flavor for someone because they're able to customize it for what they want or need. Going for a really niche but effective crit-based arcane mage build, you can start the process now without farming out an entire set of new gear for that specific purpose. And I think encouraging experimentation with stats and stuff is a big part of having players make engaging choices. Another thing I think Blizzard could add would be having quests that allow for natural exploration, and I think that would go a long way to making the world feel more alive. Blizzard started doing a few of them, but they need to remove the little hints on how to get where you need to go. That will force players to find their own way and explore Azeroth organically. And finally, the last thing I think Blizzard could do to players' decisions feel more impactful is making professions more relevant during leveling and endgame. Heavily incentivizing consumable use during leveling and increasing the strength of early game profession gear, I think would give players a reason to go out and farm gold while leveling, and at the same time, it would reward those who go out of their way to get the bonuses provided by their professions. And onto the final point, removing unnecessary stuff is probably one of the biggest improvements that Blizzard could make to the game. Lots of stuff can't be removed now because they're so ingrained and integral to the game, but I think they can be brought back in line in order to correct the problems that they've caused. One of them is LFR. LFR needs to be like it was designed to be, and that was a tour of the raid for people who are not good enough in order to experience the real raid content. It should not drop the same level as gear as a Mythic Zero dungeon. If it needs to drop that same level of gear, Blizzard Blizzard should make it harder, but that would deviate from its original purpose. So I think having LFR drop maybe heroic level dungeon gear would go to making that more in line with what their original purpose was with LFR. Dungeon Finder, I believe, is one of the main reasons that server communities have degraded. If Blizzard incentivized queuing with people on your server or prioritized people from the same server to get in queues together, I think it would go a long way to start rebuilding server community relationships, which would just strengthen the game overall, because a large portion of WoW is about the relationships you form, and most of those relationships will be on your server. And here's the big one, Titan Forging. Titan Forging has to be one of the single most destructive forces in the game when it comes to player satisfaction. It should not be possible for someone to do a low difficulty piece of content and get a best in slot piece from it, ever, no matter how rare it is. However, Blizzard did accomplish their goal of making it feel very exciting when something does Titan Forge and incentivizing the farming of content that isn't relevant in case something Titan forges. It was just at the cost of the entire gear progression in WoW as a whole. If Titan forging was eliminated, but the excitement from getting small bonuses were to stay, I believe something similar to the Warforged system in WoD would be the best option. A small 5 item level boost that could not go higher with the same chance of occurring on a piece of gear as a tertiary stat or a gem slot. This would keep the excitement from having something be slightly better than usual, while maintaining like the integrity of WoW's gear progression system and the gear curve. And lastly, catch-up mechanics. There are so many catch-up mechanics in the game right now. They have their place, and that should be at the end of an expansion. There should not be an easy way to get heroic level raiding gear from something that takes 30 minutes and an IQ of 20 to perform. Warfronts. Just remove these gearing paths until the final patch of an expansion. And even then, don't let them be equal to that tier's normal level raiding gear. Catch-up mechanics should be there to get you caught up to raiding, not to put you like in the middle of heroic progression gearing wise. So, yeah. I think if Blizzard were to find a way to correct all these mistakes that they've made, I feel like it would go a very long way into making retail WoW more engaging, fun, and rewarding. I hope y'all enjoyed the video. If you like it, feel free to leave a like. Disliked it, let me know why in the comments. This is the first video like this I'm doing, so any help is requested. I also stream on Twitch in the link shown here, so hit me up there. I stream Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, and Thursday afternoons guaranteed, and as of now, I stream pretty much every day that I'm not busy, so in the afternoon. So there's that. Hope to see you there. See ya!